Hello, and thank you for joining us. And tonight, we'll be looking at the budget statement as read by the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning on the floor of Parliament. My name is Ali Dawood, and I'll be your host as always. Tonight, I'm supposed to have two important personalities, both of them economists by profession, but we have one for the time being. He is a business economist. He's also the secretary, or the general secretary, if you like, of the UK Ireland NDC chapter. So he's a man of multiple responsibilities. I'm referring to Prince Hakeem, His Majesty, I would like to add, Prince Hakeem Alobankudi. This is first time. Prince Kasim Alobankudi. Thank you very much for your time here.
Thank you.
This is your first time, obviously, on our show, but I'm sure you know the trend.
Mm-hmm.
We say it as it is. We don't mince words.
Yeah.
We do hard talk. Prince, I'm sure you watched. Were you in Parliament?
I actually watched. I wasn't in Parliament.
What was your general impression compared to previous budget statement reading on the floor of the House?
This one was different and very frank. Previous ones were frank, but this one happens to come at a time that the NDC government is moving into serious infrastructure development, and this is a time to sustain the gains that have been made over the last 4 years. So I was very impressed with the fact that it's been anchored on a vision to advance the Better Ghana agenda, which was begun by our late President Mills, and now being advanced by His Excellency President John Mahama. It is clear that the intention is to build a very strong and resilient economy. Mm-hmm. The intention is to invest in infrastructure and expand the infrastructure we have in terms of roads and other transport infrastructure, schools, and all the things that make life meaningful to the good people of Ghana. So the government intends also to be transparent and accountable, and to give these commitments to the nation, I think, is very different.
Yeah, let's quickly delve into the specifics. We've heard prior to the reading from major opposition parties that indeed the NDC administration has overspent. If you like, the presidency has overspent in the excess of 600 million Ghana cedis, and we have heard counter explanation to that effect. We've also been told of higher budget deficits, and people are increasingly getting confused. I just want some clarification for the purposes of understanding by my viewers that when we say we have a higher budget deficit, is it all negative, or there could be a positive to that angle?
There are very positive things as well. It's not all about the negatives. Budget deficit just means that you've not been able to raise as much revenue, as much money to implement the policies that you need to implement. So what you have done is to borrow to invest, or borrow to spend. There are two differences. Okay. One is to borrow to invest in the growing sectors of the economy. Another is to borrow just to spend on frivolous expenditure. So what the NDC government has done is to borrow to invest in areas that will produce positive results for the country, for the hardworking people of Ghana. So it is not all negative. It is borrowing to invest rather than borrowing just to spend.
But the question keeps coming. If you have budgeted,
yeah,
why wouldn't you, as we normally say, cut your coat according to the size of your clothes? Why do you overspend? Why should that even be the case in the first place?
The bottom line is that there were tax projections. They projected, for instance, to raise over 700 million Ghana cedis from the oil sector. Yeah. But given that the oil sector itself is new, we just began producing oil. And as part of the agreement which was in place even before the NDC came to power, some of the oil companies have to offset, against their profits right now, because they made earlier, expenditure to discover and, produce the oil, get the oil out of the ground. Because without getting the oil out of the ground, you couldn't start start earning money for it. So the for instance, the 700 plus million Ghana cedis did not come from the oil sector in taxes. So that is one shortfall that has to be to be covered somewhere by getting money from somewhere to invest in the areas that the country needs. 12% GDP, 12% of GDP in terms of budget deficit is not that we haven't actually, this is not the first time something like that is happening to Ghana. Ghana has always...
But should that be an excuse? Oh, it has been done before, so...
no, it shouldn't be an excuse. That's why I explained earlier that there are two, in public management of the public sector, there are two things. If you are a boss, the boss of a company, and you go out there to borrow money just to pay the salaries to go on holidays and all that, you are bound to run the company aground. But if you go out there to borrow the money to invest in the company, invest in new plants, new machinery, roads linking your factories and all that, you are actually improving the company. You are improving the revenue situation. So whatever investment is being made right now out of the, somewhat unfortunate situation of budget deficit will come back to make positive impact on the Ghanaian economy because the money is being invested.
But then the opposition would ask you, we need evidence. We don't see anything.
There is enough. There is enough evidence that new roads have been constructed. If, for instance, in my constituency, from Akachi to areas like Akanu, Akachi to Agbozuma, all these things have been done by the government, and they are there to see. These things are there to see. The job 600, which will be for MPs, that is being completed. So government will only borrow to invest in areas that can grow the Ghanaian economy. The NDC government, that is what it does best. Not what we saw before. Don't forget, in 2008, the previous NPP government, they borrowed a lot, they overspent, but much of that money went into things like freebies, went into things we didn't need at the time, like 2 presidential jets, one palace that we didn't need at the time, So these things are real things in the economy that the NDC government is investing into.
Let me take your views on this. As an economist, are you satisfied with the total amount that the government is prepared to expend, if you like, for 2013? An amount of 30.5 billion Ghana cedis. That's huge. Are you satisfied? That's a 20% increase from last year's amount.
I think I can answer this question 2 ways. In one way, I am satisfied because it's an increment pretty much on the last amount. It's pretty much an improvement of about 20% on what was previously spent in the last fiscal year. But then, on knowing the needs of the hardworking people of Ghana, I wish, and it can only be a wish for now, I wish that we could spend more, to do more, to invest more in areas. But I think 20% improvement, yes, we are growing. And these will need to be invested, as the NDC always does, as the party that builds the universities in every region, and as the party that makes sure that we have 200 secondary schools, and as the party that makes sure that every region has a modern or ultra-modern hospital. I think these are areas I believe the NDC will invest in.
Okay, that's a solid note to take a first break. Stay with me. Majority Caucus continues right after this. Hello and welcome back to Majority Caucus. In case you're just joining us, the show continues live on your multi-TV. I have been joined in by my second guest. He's the Media Liaison Officer for the Ministry of Finance, referring to Hakeem Ahmed. And he has joined us, and he will give us his thoughts about the budget statement as read by the Finance Minister today on the floor of Parliament. Hakeem, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Ali.
People are raising the question that why should we move from growth rate of 14% with oil to a little over 7 or close to 7 or 8%? It looks like we are trending downwards, and they are concerned.
No, that's not the case. Ali, if you cast your mind back, you realize that in 2009, we grew the economy by 4%. And the 4% growth was because there was a lot of turbulence. There was a lot of turbulence at that time. The previous government managed to grow the economy at a certain rate, which created turbulence. So when we came, we have to do what is called stabilization. Okay. So the stabilization means that we are going to cut certain things off, and that affected the growth. So the growth became slimmer. So the following year, 2010, the growth became robust again to 8%. Then 2011, we had the astronomical 14.5 growth, which is the highest in the world in 2011. So 2012, we are growing from 2011, which is high, 14.5. If you are growing, as I gave the analogy this morning, that if you are building two houses, or if you are building two houses 10-story each, and then you build one to reach the 3rd floor, and you build another to reach the 7th floor, if you are managed to be able to add 3 floors on the 7th floor, you have done well than somebody who will only add even 5 than to add even 5 on the 3rd floor. You still haven't reached the 10th floor that you want to reach. So it's the same way. We have a bigger base, which is 14%. If you have been able to move the economy from that base, which is big, to add onto it with a bigger base, is better than if, is better than if the growth had not been 14% and you are growing. If, let's say, the growth were 8% and you are growing at another 8 or even 9%, because the base is smaller, comparable to when the base is bigger. When the base is bigger, is better.
So you think Ghana will be at an extreme disadvantage if we should target a higher growth rate beyond 14%?
Not the extreme disadvantage. It's always the case when you are growing on a base which is bigger. It's always that case. And even the 7% that we have now, that is what the Statistical Service called the provisional growth. Okay. So provisional growth, in almost all cases, when they have provisional growth, the final figures are always higher than the provisional growth. So we believe that by the time that they bring the final growth, we will reach the 9 percentage point that we are anticipating.
But tell me about this relationship between interest rates and inflation rates. People are getting confused and increasingly. That's why is the inflation rate so low, yet the interest rate on, let's say, treasury bills are high?
Ali, the question of...
It's a song that has been sung by the opposition.
It has a different, it's a different explanation. We know that conventionally when they say that once you have inflation right, you have macroeconomy, everything moving on, then you should have interest rates coming. But you see, managing an economy is not a question of, it's not textbooks, it's not economic models that somebody has done.
Senior high school.
Yes, it's not something which is in the book. It's experience when you keep on going, because every economy has its own dynamics.
Okay.
So you cannot use theories, economic theories or economic models that has been done somewhere and say that you want to forcibly apply it. So those people who are raising that are just using academics. You know, they are theories and other things to explain that. But fundamentally, the problem of interest rate then, as people were talking about, was a problem of non-performing loans in the books of the banks.
Okay.
If you have non-performing loans, you would not be able to have a lot of space to be able to give out money easily the way you have because of the risks. So you have to put all those factors together before you can lend out. And the non-performing loans came about because the previous government, as I'm saying again, gave projects out to people, and the people had to go, let's say, go and build this road, go and build that road. That was in 2008, 2007, 2008. Supply this thing, supply that thing, when there was no secured source of funding. So they went to the banks to take loans, and because there was no money to readily pay them after the projects, the banks, they were having difficulties to pay back the loans that the bank had given them. So those loans, you know, were becoming, you know, non-performing loans. So because of that, the banks were finding it difficult to open up to innocent businesses or innocent individuals, you know, and that created the problem. And then people just ignore that, and then concentrating on, if you say inflation is single, why is interest rate? When the picture is on the non-performing loans.
Okay, so we can be rest assured that the bank is safe.
Of course, you see, now they also talk about why is government borrowing at 22% in the market. Government instruments are on the average 22%, 23%, forgetting that somewhere in early 2000 and by the middle of 2011, government was borrowing at around 9%, 9.5%, single digits borrowing. So it was the onset of, you know, slide in the city in the last quarter of the year that created, you know, that government had to use the instrument of interest rate to be able to control the slide of the city. And that's why government had to be generous on people who want to invest in Ghanaian assets, Ghanaian bonds and instruments. If you want people to invest in your assets, first to be able to control the slide in the city, to generate a lot of resources in terms of foreign exchange, to be able to you know, flood your market with more foreign exchange, to be able to boost the city, you have to make your investment, your instruments very attractive. So you have to reward those who would want to risk by investing in your instrument at the time that your currency is not too strong. So government had to move on from the single digits that they were giving, almost 9% interest rate on government bonds, on government instruments, to, you know, higher rates, so that people who want to invest in those government papers would get adequately be rewarded, and then that would help to fight the slide in the city. But now that the city has stabilized, you are going to have all government instruments now coming down. It even started, you know, before this, you know, noise about the deficits, you know, came in. Some of the bonds, some of the papers started, instruments started, the interest on them started sliding before this noise. So hopefully they will come down again, and when they come, government will be free. The costs on government loans in the domestic market will all come down.
But quickly, I have put this question to Prince Kasim already. How sure are we that we are not going to witness another over expenditure, or let me say over expenses? Because the new chorus now for your main opposition is that you have over spent you know, your budget. and that has resulted in higher budget deficits, 12% of the GDP.
The minister,
how sure are mechanisms are now in place?
The minister adequately,
to avoid
I can
that.
say adequately explained that today when he presented the budget. He went to the genesis of the deficits. First, he mentioned the problem of the single spine salary structure.
Yes.
Our public sector wage was around 2.4 billion before the onset of the single spine, which has moved it to about.
I'll talk about single spine salary structure because you took the glory.
So you see,
you were happy to implement it.
That is a problem. Then we have the costs on the loans that we took, the cost on the bonds that we floated in the domestic market. Interest rate on them were becoming high, and a lot of the monies that were used in those from proceeds of those bonds went into financing projects that the previous government started without good source of funding. So the cost on them, then cost of utility subsidies, and then the cost, including even arrears that the previous government left, which was around 4 billion Ghana cedis. All this came together to create, to fuel the turbulence that we have now, and which created the deficit of 12%. But if you look at the budget, adequate measures have been put in place to make sure that we do what is called consolidation. We reduce the deficit down to 9%, and then further reduce it up to the time that it will reach the levels that we want. So there's no problem with what is happening. This deficit issue is, as the minister said, is one of the easiest to explain because we know how it has come about. We know the genesis of it. We know who caused it, and then, it's not anything that can have any cascading
I'll come back
on,
to you with a single spine.
Yes.
Prince Hakim, we saw also a mention of the tax. There's going to be a possible expansion of the tax base. As to how that will be achieved, I'm sure people are becoming very skeptical that, hey, don't introduce new taxes. If it is people you think hitherto are not paying tax, find mechanisms and bring them in. But for those of us who are paying, please don't increase it. Are we sure it's not a 10 that we are about to witness?
What I can say is that the tax for individuals will not increase in any way. Looking at the tax allowance, they have revised the tax allowance in line with the NDC party's social democratic principles, meaning that not until you are earning over 31,000 Ghana cedis, you would not pay the 25% higher rate for a tax in this country. Meaning that not until you are, and that's in old Ghana cedis, it's about 310 million annually. Yeah. And you have to earn that much before you actually even pay the existing percentage of tax. So for individuals, there's no need to worry. There's no need to worry at all. Now, where the tax net has to be expanded are people who aren't paying, people who should pay, but they are not paying. That we all would want to,
Also the informal sector.
Informal sector.
How do you make them pay?
It is difficult, but I know the Ghana Revenue Authority has over the years introduced new things. And one thing we keep forgetting is that tax take has been increasing for so many years now. Tax take by the Treasury has been increasing. But because of the revision in the base of the economy, revising how the GDP is calculated and all that, we need to do more. Because we know that the Ghanaian economy is really, really performing well. Just that we are still developing economy. We are a transition economy, transitioning to higher levels. So what we need to do now is to ensure that we bring as many people. But I can assure the hardworking people of Ghana that your tax is not, your personal income tax that you have to pay to the government is not seeing any real upward adjustment. Those who are earning lower incomes, like for instance, those who are earning under 3,100, 3,200, if I'm not wrong, but around that figure, the revision has been done in such a way that these people will have a higher tax allowance, meaning you have to be earning up until a certain percentage before you actually pay money to the government.
Okay. But you see, the argument has always been the fact that it is difficult to keep track. And that was why I was excited when the president mentioned in the presidential debate, i.e. presidential debate, he made mention of bringing some technology into play and how to, track the informal sector through the collaboration of Ghana Revenue Authority. Except that has not been mentioned in the budget, even though that's an abridged version. One would have imagined that for such a novel aspect of trying to track people who pay tax, something at all will be said about that, Hakim.
Yes, the issues of taxation across the globe is the issue of fairness, is the issue of redistribution of resources, and then in favor of the poor across the world, everywhere. Obama had to fight members of the Republican Party over this issue because in America, 99% of the population are grappling on how to survive, while the 1% of Americans are wallowing in opulence. So Obama was working very hard to be able to get something from the 1% and then give it back to the 99%. Okay. And basically that is the principles of taxation. So what our minister did today or said today on the floor of the House on the revenue measures are basically to conform to these principles. The taxes are devised in such a way that there will be tax reliefs for the poor. And then areas that were the threshold that were increased on VAT were all to be able to find a way of getting, bigger corporations, to pay taxes in the right direction so that the poor would always benefit. So fundamentally, the principles of fairness are what was exhibited on the floor of the House by our minister today. So there's no anywhere in the budget that you can see any increase of tax rates. It's just about trying to widen to get the people,
so people
who get more
apprehensive. It's needless.
There's no issue of it's more of the normal cynicism that comes in this political game that we are
energy.
All in. Yes.
I'll come to you, Prince Kasim. Energy. Yes. Some did not agree with the finance minister that justice was done to that sector, especially considering the unique situation that we found ourselves in. The mention of Bui, and not too much hope was given, according to some pundits, economic pundits. Serious mention in terms of investment.
If you agree with me, I'll answer this.
Yeah, to bring it. You want to take that one to bring it on board.
If
quickly.
You agree with me, that I will take the
of course
the wind out of the sail. Yes. Yeah. You see, budget in itself. I said this morning. Is, as you see the document, it's just not an ordinary document.
At all.
I said it's not a wish list. Another, is it a document that you just look at what you say, I want to buy this, then I go and buy. That is not the purpose of budgeting. Budgeting is a document that is always linked with planning. So we have what we call the long-term plans normally, we have the medium-term plans, and even within the Ministry of Finance, we have what we call the MTEF, which is a medium-term expenditure framework. And these are plans which are supposed to link with the budget. That is why, in most cases, you see often Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. So once we have the finance side, then the economic planning comes. So they go hand in hand. So there should always be a plan, so that, and the plan should not be just a one-year plan. So the plan should be either a long-term plan or a medium-term plan. And that is why previously we even had the Vision 2020. Okay. And then if you can cast your mind back, we have GPRS1, we have GPRS2, and now currently this budget is linked with a plan that we call GSGDA. Okay. So this plan is a 3-year plan, and that is also connected to our MTEF. So budget cannot just mention everything in a go.
Because it's a 3-year.
Energy sector is very crucial, and I think there has been some mention of it in the budget. Yes. And if you take the bigger document, you see a lot on what government has done, because this is an abridged form. You cannot capture everything. And assuming, even if you capture, it's not everything that you can capture. And that is why it's a plan. So anything that comes in, the policy must fit into the plan. Okay. It's not a question of, we have a one-sided idea on what the budget should do or should say. But this should go with a plan. It's not an haphazard way of doing things. Otherwise, there's no way a country can develop. That is the old way of doing things. So people wanted to see this or that or that or that in the budget. I think with due respect, is misplaced.
You don't agree with that?
Yes, it's misplaced, because budgeting is purely linked with
they
planning.
just wanted some
that's not okay. Well, hope is good, and the hope comes with if you look at the efforts of government on this infrastructure in gas. And this is something that everybody knows, that once we are able to get hold of that infrastructure, the perennial problems that we are having on energy would vanish. And the infrastructure government is very serious with that. And you know the efforts that have been put in that. So fundamentally, that is what the people of Ghana...
I'll come back to Prince, but let me take this text message from Alhaji Bature in connection with the question I asked about a higher growth rate beyond 14%, and he said that a 14% in 2011 was one-off event, and you do not expect to go higher unless there's another sudden and bigger influx of return on investment the following year. And he gave an example of 8% growth rate to an 8-story building, which is better than 14% of growth rates equivalent to 4-story building. So 8 to 8 is far better than. And I think that is in pure agreement with the position that you stated. But talk about gas, really. This is not a platform that we want to discuss energy, but like I said, it is crucial. And that the point I was trying to make was that people wanted to hear specific investment into that sector to reassure them that indeed the president, apart from touring, which is significant, is more than committed in terms of resources to ensure that
just pick up the budget. Pick up the budget and see.
You talk about that in the budget. Let me listen to Prince Kasim.
Yes. The truth about the energy sector is that the government of Ghana has always done everything possible to improve the sector. At this particular time, the problems we face, it is strongly envisaged that with the Bui Power Authority producing hydroelectric power of about 400 megawatts, eventually there would be reserve capacity. And then the government is not sitting down doing nothing. The government is investing. Don't forget the Bui Dam, the $600 million which was agreed between the then NPP government and the Chinese people was not enough at the end of the day to complete the project. So it took this NDC government to go and look for additional funding. Else, what's the point? If you start a 9-story building and you can't finish it, who's going to live in it? That's the question.
Absolutely.
And so it took the NDC to go out there, look for additional funding, and hopefully things are on course. And what we have to do now is to support the president with his commitment. Let's support him so that he can get this project finished. We are hoping that within a few more weeks, 100 and something megawatts would come would be fed into the national grid, and we can move forward. Then the gas briefly, before I finish on this energy point. It took an NDC government under the leadership of President Mills and now President John Mahama to go and source funding for a gas processing plant. Because if we had these gas processing plants like, you know, the 8 years people spent in power, and they were supposed to be adding 100 megawatts every year, they didn't do that. If we were to have the gas processing plant as we would soon have, by kind courtesy of the NDC government, we would not be facing the West African gas pipeline being cut off from supplying our power plants. Okay. And then we get thrown into this dangerous situation of energy crisis. Indeed. So when we have the gas plant being built by the NDC government, we will not face this kind of problem again. We'll be able to power our power generation units.
Definitely. Prince Hakim, Kasim and Hakim, the names. But you know, the interesting thing is that I have heard some civil servants talk about the fact that, hey, government is now talking about single spine, and that it is costing close to 70% you know, of the entire revenue, and they are getting scared. Yeah. Are we going to see a scrap off of the single spine?
No, there's no any policy on that.
How do you manage it with this high rate of high percentage of debt that you do have?
Well, the problem of spending
because you have social interventions that you want to make.
The problem of spending money is if there is no sufficient, adequate, if you like, commensurate productivity. Once you spend and there is no productivity, then you begin to have a problem with value for money. But if you look at what the minister said, government has rolled out programs to ensure that the money that is going to the public service is commensurate with the productivity that, you know, we get from their work. So once we are able to get the desired productivity, I think there will not be any problem, you know, on anything. I don't think there's any, and there will be any policy to scrap the single spine. Government will work out whatever we can to be able to.
So there's no cause for worry.
Nobody should worry about.
Single spine is here to stay.
Single spine is there, and then there's no policy to scrap it.
Prince Kasim, your concluding remarks.
Yes.
30 seconds.
Thank you. I am very happy about the kinds of social investments that the NDC government would want to embark on in this second term. It's about investing in the people of Ghana, making sure that there are new things that the youth of this country can benefit from. And what I will really plead for is that we support this NDC government. The President, John Mahama, he's got what it takes. He genuinely wants to improve the lot of all Ghanaians, not just a section of Ghanaians. Every Ghanaian, regardless of your political affiliation, where you come from or whatsoever. And that was made very clear by the Honorable Finance Minister. So let's support this government and let's move forward.
And Hakim, you are from the Finance Ministry. In one word, how do you describe this year's budget?
Yes, it's a budget of hope, and then it's a budget that would help us to move from our low middle income status to a full-fledged middle income status. And we should have modernized infrastructure in the coming years, and then infrastructure on health, infrastructure on education, infrastructure on ports, roads, you know, agriculture, modernize. And I mean, fundamentally, we should have a transformed society at the end of whatever is being done from now.
Okay, thank you very much. Prince Kasim and Abdullah Hakim from the Finance Ministry. Prince Kasim is the General Secretary for the NDC UK Ireland chapter. He's also a business economist. We end the discussion here for tonight, but do make a date with me on Thursday. Till then, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.